The fluorescent lights of Morrison and Associates cast harsh shadows across the marble lobby as Sophia Chen clutched her worn messenger bag tighter against her chest, the weight of her laptop inside pressing against her ribs like a constant reminder of the precarious balance she was maintaining. Her second-hand blazer, purchased from a thrift store 3 months ago when she first stepped into this gleaming tower of corporate ambition, hung slightly loose on her petite frame, and she had learned to hold herself in a way that made the ill-fitting garment appear more intentional than desperate. The security guard barely glanced up from his newspaper as she swiped her intern badge, the magnetic strip worn thin from countless entries during early mornings and late nights that stretched far beyond her official hours. "Morning, Marcus," she said softly to the guard, who responded with a grunt that might have been acknowledgement or merely the sound of someone clearing their throat. Sophia had learned not to take these small slights personally, though they accumulated like tiny cuts that eventually formed deeper wounds. She stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the 42nd floor where Morrison and Associates maintained their headquarters, and watched the numbers climb while mentally rehearsing the presentation she had been working on until 3 in the morning. The elevator dinged softly as it reached her floor, and Sophia stepped out into the familiar maze of cubicles and glass-walled offices that had become her second home over the past 6 months. The morning rush had not yet begun in earnest, giving her precious time to settle at her small desk in the corner of the intern bullpen, a space so cramped that she had to turn sideways to squeeze between her chair and the filing cabinet that perpetually threatened to topple over whenever someone opened the top drawer too enthusiastically. She powered on her ancient laptop, a machine that wheezed and clicked like an old car struggling to start on a cold morning, and began organizing the materials for today's client presentation. The project had been assigned to her supervisor, Jennifer Walsh, a woman whose perfectly manicured nails seemed to exist solely for the purpose of drumming impatiently on conference tables while others spoke. Jennifer had taken credit for Sophia's innovative marketing strategies on 3 separate occasions, each time with such casual confidence that Sophia had begun to question whether she was being paranoid or simply naive about how corporate hierarchies functioned. The irony of her situation was not lost on Sophia, though she kept this knowledge locked away like a secret treasure that might lose its power if exposed to light. 6 months ago, when she had walked into Morrison and Associates as an intern earning $15 an hour, she had already owned the company for 2 years. The acquisition had been handled through a series of shell companies and legal maneuvers so complex that even she sometimes lost track of the ownership chain, but the bottom line was simple: every paycheck that Jennifer Walsh received, every bonus that the senior partners celebrated, every profit margin that made the shareholders smile, ultimately flowed through accounts that Sophia controlled. Her father, Chen Wei-ming, had built his fortune in technology and real estate across 3 continents, creating an empire that most people could never fully comprehend. When Sophia graduated from Stanford with degrees in both business and computer science, he had made her an offer that seemed almost too generous: take control of a small portfolio of his American investments and prove that she could grow them without trading on his name or reputation. Morrison and Associates had been struggling when she acquired it, bleeding clients and talent in equal measure, but she saw potential in their core competencies that others had overlooked. The transformation she had orchestrated from the outside had been subtle but effective. New clients began appearing, drawn by marketing strategies that seemed to emerge from nowhere but proved remarkably successful. Key hires were made, talented individuals who mysteriously became available just when the company needed their specific skills. Technology upgrades appeared in the budget with suspicious timing, always approved by unanimous votes from a board of directors who never quite seemed to understand how such decisions had been reached. Sophia had enrolled in the internship program not because she needed the money or the experience, but because she wanted to understand the company from the ground up, to see how her distant manipulations translated into daily reality for the people who actually did the work. What she had discovered was both enlightening and deeply troubling. The culture she observed bore little resemblance to the values she had tried to instill through careful board directives and policy suggestions. Instead of the collaborative, innovative environment she had envisioned, she found a place where hierarchy mattered more than competence, where taking credit was valued more highly than creating value, and where someone like Jennifer Walsh could build an entire career on appropriating the work of others. The morning routine continued around her as the office gradually filled with employees who viewed her as nothing more than free labor, someone whose contributions were convenient but ultimately disposable. Brad Morrison, the grandson of the company's founder and current vice president of strategic development, emerged from the elevator at precisely 9:15, as he did every morning, carrying a coffee that cost more than Sophia's daily food budget and wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His eyes swept across the intern area with the casual indifference of someone who had never needed to worry about money, never needed to prove himself, and never needed to consider the possibility that someone sitting in that corner desk might actually own the building he worked in. "Walsh," he called out, his voice carrying the particular brand of authority that comes from inherited position rather than earned respect. "Conference room 3, 10 minutes. Bring the Henderson presentation materials." Jennifer Walsh's head snapped up from her computer screen with the eager attention of someone whose entire career depended on anticipating the needs of people like Brad Morrison. She began gathering papers and folders with practiced efficiency, her movements sharp and purposeful as she prepared for what Sophia knew would be a presentation built entirely on work that Sophia herself had completed during weekend hours that officially didn't exist. "Chen," Jennifer said without looking in Sophia's direction, her voice carrying the tone of someone addressing a piece of office equipment. "Make copies of everything in the Henderson folder. Collate them in presentation packets. 20 copies, and make sure the binding is perfect. Mr. Morrison doesn't tolerate sloppy presentation materials." Sophia nodded and stood, making her way to the copy machine that occupied a corner of the office like a mechanical monster waiting to jam at the worst possible moment. As she fed pages through the machine, she could hear fragments of conversation from Jennifer's desk as her supervisor made phone calls to confirm details that Sophia had researched and compiled, taking credit for insights that had required hours of analysis and creative thinking. The Henderson account represented a potential $12 million contract, a logistics and supply chain optimization project that would transform how Henderson Industries managed their operations across 4 states. Sophia had identified the opportunity 3 months ago while researching companies that might benefit from Morrison & Associates' core services, but more importantly, she had developed the entire strategic framework that would make their proposal irresistible. Her analysis had uncovered inefficiencies in Henderson's current system that were costing them nearly $2 million annually, and she had designed solutions that would not only eliminate those losses but actually generate additional revenue streams. The presentation she had created was more than just a business proposal, it was a masterpiece of strategic thinking that demonstrated deep understanding of Henderson's industry, their competitive challenges, and their long-term growth objectives. She had worked backward from Henderson's publicly stated goals to design solutions that would help them achieve those objectives while generating substantial fees for Morrison & Associates. Every slide had been carefully crafted to build momentum toward an inevitable conclusion, that Morrison & Associates was not just the best choice for this project, but the only logical choice. Jennifer Walsh had reviewed Sophia's work exactly once, spending approximately 15 minutes skimming through the presentation while simultaneously checking her email and eating a salad at her desk. Her only comment had been that the font size on slide 12 was too small, a criticism that revealed how little attention she had actually paid to the content. Now, as Sophia listened to Jennifer discussing her strategic insights with colleagues, she marveled at the casual confidence with which someone could claim ownership of work they barely understood. The copy machine finished its work with a mechanical sigh, and Sophia began the meticulous process of collating and binding the presentation packets. Each page had to be perfectly aligned, every binding clean and professional, because Brad Morrison's standards for presentation materials were as exacting as his standards for everything else in his carefully controlled world. Sophia had learned these requirements through trial and error, enduring Jennifer's sharp criticisms whenever her work failed to meet the unspoken expectations that governed every aspect of office culture. As she worked, Sophia found herself thinking about her father's teachings about leadership and responsibility. Chen Weiming had built his empire through careful observation and strategic patience, understanding that true power came not from commanding others but from creating conditions where the right outcomes became inevitable. He had taught her that the best leaders were often invisible, working behind the scenes to shape events while allowing others to take credit for success. This philosophy had served him well in building businesses across multiple cultures and economic systems, but Sophia was beginning to wonder if such an approach was sustainable in an environment where credit theft was not just tolerated but actively rewarded. The presentation packets were completed just as Brad Morrison emerged from his office, adjusting his tie with the unconscious gesture of someone who had been taught from childhood that appearance mattered as much as substance. He surveyed the office with the casual authority of someone who had never doubted his right to be in charge, his gaze passing over Sophia as if she were part of the furniture. Jennifer Walsh appeared at his elbow with practiced timing, armed with the presentation materials and ready to discuss strategy for the Henderson meeting. "The logistics optimization angle is particularly strong," Jennifer said, her voice carrying the confident tone of someone discussing their own insights. "I've identified several inefficiencies in their current system that are costing them significant money annually. The solutions I've developed will not only eliminate those losses but actually generate new revenue streams." Sophia's hands tightened on the edge of her desk as she listened to Jennifer describe her analysis using almost exactly the same words Sophia had used when explaining her findings. The casual appropriation of language, ideas, and credit had become so routine that Jennifer no longer seemed to recognize any distinction between her own work and work she had simply reviewed. In Jennifer's mind, the act of supervising Sophia's efforts was apparently sufficient to transform those efforts into her own intellectual property. Brad Morrison nodded thoughtfully as Jennifer spoke, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated his own superficial understanding of the project. His queries focused primarily on presentation logistics and client management rather than the strategic substance that formed the heart of Sophia's proposal. This pattern had become familiar to Sophia over her months at Morrison and Associates, as senior leadership was far more concerned with managing impressions than understanding the actual work that created value for clients. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock, giving Jennifer and Brad several hours to review the materials and prepare their presentation strategy. Sophia knew that this preparation would consist primarily of Jennifer explaining to Brad the insights she had stolen from Sophia's analysis, while Brad focused on determining how best to position himself as the key relationship manager for this important new client. Neither of them would spend significant time actually understanding the complex optimization strategies that formed the core of their proposal, because neither of them possessed the technical background necessary to engage with such details. As the morning progressed, Sophia found herself observing the office dynamics with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. The hierarchies that governed daily interactions were as rigid as anything she had encountered in her studies of traditional corporate structures, but they seemed to operate according to rules that had little relationship to actual competence or contribution. Success appeared to be measured primarily by one's ability to navigate political relationships and claim credit for results, while the people who actually created those results remained invisible and undervalued. Around 11:30, Sophia received an email from Jennifer requesting that she research Henderson Industries' recent financial performance and compile a summary that could be used to demonstrate Morrison and Associates' understanding of their client's business environment. This was exactly the type of analysis that Sophia had already completed 3 weeks ago as part of her original research, but Jennifer had apparently forgotten about this work or simply assumed that it would need to be redone to meet her current needs. Rather than pointing out that this information already existed in her comprehensive project files, Sophia simply acknowledged the request and began preparing a new summary that would meet Jennifer's specifications. She had learned that any attempt to reference her previous work would be met with impatience and criticism, as if her assumption that Jennifer might remember or value her earlier contributions was somehow presumptuous. It was easier and more efficient to simply complete the requested work than to navigate the complex emotional dynamics that governed her relationship with her supervisor. The financial analysis revealed several interesting trends that supported the strategic recommendations Sophia had developed in her original proposal. Henderson Industries had been struggling with declining profit margins in their core business lines, largely due to inefficiencies in their supply chain management that were forcing them to maintain higher inventory levels than their competitors. Their recent quarterly reports showed increasing pressure from shareholders to improve operational efficiency, creating an ideal environment for the type of comprehensive optimization project that Morrison and Associates was proposing. More importantly, Sophia's research had uncovered evidence that Henderson's primary competitors were already implementing similar optimization strategies, meaning that Henderson faced a choice between acting quickly to improve their operations or falling further behind in an increasingly competitive market. This created urgency that would work in Morrison and Associates' favor during contract negotiations, assuming that Jennifer and Brad were capable of understanding and articulating these competitive dynamics during their presentation. As she compiled her analysis, Sophia found herself wondering what would happen if she simply revealed her true identity and took direct control of the Henderson presentation. The thought was simultaneously appealing and terrifying, representing a complete abandonment of the careful strategy she had been pursuing for the past 6 months. Her father had taught her the value of patience and observation, but he had also taught her that there came a time when direct action became necessary to protect important interests. The lunch hour arrived with its usual chaos of competing food orders and elevator traffic, but Sophia remained at her desk, using the relative quiet to review the presentation materials one final time. She wanted to ensure that Jennifer and Brad would have everything they needed to succeed, even though she knew that any success would be credited to them rather than to her. This contradiction had become a constant source of internal tension, challenging her understanding of what it meant to serve her own company's interests while maintaining her cover as a powerless intern. Jennifer returned from lunch with the particular energy of someone who had spent an hour discussing strategy with colleagues, her confidence visibly elevated by whatever conversations had taken place in the executive dining room. She approached Sophia's desk with the brisk efficiency of someone preparing for an important performance, her eyes already focused on the materials and logistics that would determine the success of the Henderson presentation. "Chen, I need you to set up the conference room," Jennifer said, her voice carrying the unconscious authority of someone who had never doubted their right to give orders. "Make sure the projector is working properly and that we have fresh water and appropriate refreshments. Mr. Morrison has very specific requirements for client meetings, and everything needs to be perfect." Sophia nodded and gathered the necessary materials, making her way to the conference room that would serve as the stage for Jennifer's performance. The room was designed to impress, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city skyline and a polished conference table that could seat 20 people comfortably. The technology was sophisticated and reliable, assuming that the person operating it possessed basic competence, but Sophia had learned to test everything multiple times to ensure that technical difficulties wouldn't undermine the presentation. As she arranged chairs and tested audiovisual equipment, Sophia found herself thinking about the Henderson executives who would soon be sitting around this table, listening to Jennifer present strategies that Sophia had developed. These were serious business leaders facing real challenges in a competitive industry, and they deserved to hear from someone who actually understood the solutions being proposed. Instead, they would receive a polished performance from someone whose primary qualification was her ability to appropriate and repackage the work of others. The irony of her situation crystallized with particular clarity as she adjusted the projector settings and ensured that every slide would display properly. She was essentially a ghost haunting her own company, watching from the shadows as others claimed credit for her vision and expertise. The power she possessed was real but unusable, at least within the context of her current strategy, leaving her trapped in a role that grew more frustrating with each passing day. At 1:30, Jennifer appeared in the conference room doorway carrying the presentation materials and wearing an expression of focused determination. She had changed into her most expensive suit and had clearly spent time refreshing her makeup and ensuring that her appearance met the standards she believed were necessary for such an important meeting. Her transformation from office supervisor to client-facing executive was remarkable in its completeness, as if she had put on a costume that gave her access to confidence and authority she didn't normally possess. "Everything looks good," Jennifer said, surveying the room with the critical eye of someone whose entire career depended on managing impressions successfully. "Make sure you're available during the meeting in case we need additional materials or technical support. Stay in your desk area so you can respond quickly if called upon." Sophia nodded and returned to her desk, from which she could hear fragments of conversation as the Henderson executives arrived and were escorted to the conference room. The voices were professional and courteous, carrying the particular tone of people who were accustomed to being treated with respect and deference. She recognized the names from her research: Patricia Henderson, the company's CEO and daughter of the founder, and Michael Chen, their chief operating officer who had been hired specifically to address the operational challenges that Morrison and Associates was proposing to solve, and Jennifer Kim, their chief financial officer whose focus on cost reduction had created the internal pressure for the type of comprehensive optimization project that could justify a $12 million investment. Brad Morrison's voice joined the conversation as he welcomed the Henderson team and began the social pleasantries that preceded most business meetings. His tone was warm and confident, carrying the easy authority of someone who had been trained from childhood to manage such interactions. Sophia could hear him discussing mutual acquaintances and shared interests, building the personal relationships that often determined the success of major business deals more than the actual quality of proposals. The presentation began with Jennifer's voice explaining the agenda and outlining the strategic framework that would guide their discussion. Sophia found herself holding her breath as Jennifer articulated concepts that Sophia had developed through weeks of careful analysis, waiting to see if her supervisor would be able to field questions that went beyond the surface level of understanding required for a basic presentation. The initial questions were predictable and well within Jennifer's ability to handle, focusing on timeline, budget, and general implementation strategy. As the meeting progressed, however, the Henderson executives began asking more sophisticated questions that revealed their deep understanding of their own business challenges. Patricia Henderson wanted to know how the proposed optimization strategies would integrate with their existing technology infrastructure, while Michael Chen was interested in the specific methodologies that would be used to identify and eliminate operational inefficiencies. These were exactly the types of questions that Sophia had anticipated and prepared for, but they required technical knowledge that went well beyond Jennifer's superficial familiarity with the project. Sophia could hear Jennifer's responses becoming more general and less specific as she struggled to address questions that demanded real expertise. The confident tone that had characterized the opening of her presentation began to waver as she was forced to acknowledge gaps in her knowledge and defer detailed technical discussions to follow-up meetings with our implementation specialists. Each admission of ignorance undermined the authority that Jennifer was trying to project, creating doubt about Morrison and Associates' actual capability to deliver on their ambitious promises. The turning point came when Jennifer Kim, the Henderson CFO, asked about the financial modeling that supported the projected return on investment calculations. This was an area where Sophia's analysis had been particularly sophisticated, incorporating complex scenarios and sensitivity analyses that demonstrated her deep understanding of both financial modeling and Henderson's specific business environment. Jennifer Walsh's response revealed that she had never actually examined the underlying calculations, understanding only the high-level conclusions that Sophia had summarized in her presentation materials. "I'd prefer to have our financial analysis team provide you with detailed modeling documentation," Jennifer said, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that had not been present earlier in the meeting. "The calculations are quite complex, and I want to ensure that you receive the most accurate and comprehensive information possible." This response might have been acceptable if Jennifer had demonstrated strong command of other aspects of the proposal, but combined with her earlier struggles with technical questions, it created an impression of incomplete preparation that was clearly troubling to the Henderson executives. Sophia could hear the subtle shift in the tone as they began asking more pointed questions designed to test the depth of Morrison and Associates' understanding of their business challenges. Brad Morrison attempted to intervene and redirect the conversation toward relationship management and general strategic vision, but his own limitations became apparent as soon as the discussion moved beyond surface-level business concepts. His questions revealed that he had never actually studied Henderson's industry in any detail, understanding their business only through the lens of general corporate consulting principles that might apply to any company in any sector. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, but Sophia could hear that the energy had shifted significantly from the optimistic momentum of the opening presentations. The Henderson executives were professional and courteous, but their questions had revealed gaps in Morrison and Associates' preparation that could not be easily overcome through charm and relationship management. By the time the meeting concluded with promises of follow-up communications and additional technical discussions, it was clear that Morrison and Associates' chances of winning the Henderson contract had been seriously compromised. After the Henderson executives departed, Sophia could hear Jennifer and Brad conducting a post-mortem analysis in the conference room, their voices carrying the particular tension of people who recognized that an important opportunity had been mishandled. Jennifer's tone was defensive as she attempted to minimize the significance of the technical questions she had struggled to answer, while Brad's responses suggested frustration with what he viewed as inadequate preparation for such an important presentation. "We need to schedule a follow-up meeting as quickly as possible," Jennifer said, her voice carrying the urgent energy of someone trying to recover from a significant mistake. "I'll work with Chen to develop more detailed technical documentation that addresses their specific concerns. We can't afford to lose this contract because of presentation issues." The irony of Jennifer's statement was almost overwhelming for Sophia, who possessed both the technical expertise and the detailed analysis that could have prevented the problems they had encountered. If Jennifer had actually studied the materials that Sophia had prepared, or if she had acknowledged Sophia's qualifications and included her in the presentation planning, the Henderson executives would have received exactly the type of sophisticated analysis they were seeking. Instead, Jennifer's determination to claim credit for work she didn't understand had created a situation where that work couldn't be effectively presented or defended. As evening approached and the office began to empty, Jennifer appeared at Sophia's desk with an expression that combined urgency with barely suppressed panic. The confidence that had characterized her morning preparations had been replaced by the particular stress of someone who recognized that their career advancement depended on recovering from a serious mistake. "I need you to prepare detailed technical documentation that addresses every question the Henderson team asked today," Jennifer said, her voice carrying the tone of someone issuing an emergency directive. "Work through the weekend if necessary, but I need comprehensive materials that demonstrate our expertise in supply chain optimization, financial modeling, and systems integration. This is your top priority until it's completed." Sophia nodded and began organizing her files, though she knew that the materials Jennifer was requesting already existed in the comprehensive analysis she had completed weeks ago. The technical documentation, financial models, and implementation strategies that Jennifer now desperately needed had been sitting in project folders that Jennifer had never bothered to examine in detail. Rather than pointing out this oversight, however, Sophia simply accepted the assignment and began preparing for a weekend of work that would essentially involve repackaging information she had already developed. The next morning arrived with the particular energy of a crisis response team mobilizing to address an emergency. Jennifer arrived early and immediately began coordinating with various department specialists to develop the supplementary materials that she believed were necessary to salvage the Henderson opportunity. Her approach was scattered and reactive, lacking the systematic thinking that had characterized Sophia's original analysis, but it demonstrated a level of energy and commitment that had been absent from her earlier preparation efforts. "Chen, I need you to research Henderson's technology infrastructure and identify potential integration challenges," Jennifer said, apparently unaware that Sophia's original analysis had included a detailed assessment of exactly these issues. "Also, prepare alternative implementation timelines that account for different scenarios and risk factors. We need to demonstrate flexibility and comprehensive planning." Sophia spent the morning recreating analysis that she had already completed, reformatting her findings to match Jennifer's current presentation preferences while maintaining the technical rigor that had characterized her original work. The process was both frustrating and educational, revealing how much additional work was created when projects were managed by people who didn't understand their underlying complexity. Around noon, Patricia Henderson's assistant called to schedule the follow-up meeting, but her tone was noticeably cooler than it had been during the initial contact. The Henderson team was clearly proceeding with their evaluation process, but their enthusiasm for Morrison and Associates as a potential partner had been dampened by the previous day's presentation issues. Jennifer accepted a meeting time for the following Thursday, giving her team 5 days to develop the materials and expertise that should have been available from the beginning. The weekend passed in a blur of research, analysis, and document preparation as Jennifer assembled a team of specialists to address the technical questions that had exposed Morrison and Associates' inadequate preparation. Sophia found herself working closely with financial analysts, technology specialists, and project management consultants, all of whom were impressed by the depth and sophistication of the preliminary analysis she had completed months earlier. "This is really comprehensive work," said David Park, the financial modeling specialist who had been brought in to review Sophia's ROI calculations. "Whoever developed this analysis has a sophisticated understanding of both financial modeling and supply chain economics. The scenario planning is particularly impressive." These conversations were both validating and frustrating for Sophia, who was finally receiving recognition for the quality of her work from people qualified to evaluate it, but only in the context of crisis response rather than normal project development. She began to understand that Morrison and Associates employed genuinely talented specialists who were capable of sophisticated analysis and strategic thinking, but that these resources were typically deployed reactively rather than proactively, usually in response to problems that could have been prevented through better project management. By Tuesday morning, the supplementary materials were ready for Jennifer's review, and Sophia had to admit that the crisis response had produced documentation that was even more comprehensive than her original analysis. The pressure of potential failure had motivated everyone involved to produce their best work, creating materials that demonstrated Morrison and Associates' actual capabilities rather than the superficial presentation skills that Jennifer typically relied upon. Jennifer's review of the materials revealed her growing understanding of how serious her initial mistakes had been. The technical documentation that Sophia and the specialist team had prepared was far more sophisticated than anything Jennifer had expected, demonstrating levels of expertise and strategic thinking that went well beyond her original assumptions about the project's complexity. "This is excellent work," Jennifer said, though her tone carried notes of confusion and concern that suggested she was beginning to recognize her own limitations. "I had no idea that the Henderson project involved such complex technical considerations. Why wasn't this level of analysis included in the original presentation materials?" The question hung in the air between them, creating a moment of tension that neither Jennifer nor Sophia seemed prepared to address directly. The honest answer was that this level of analysis had been included in Sophia's original work, but that Jennifer had never bothered to study it carefully enough to understand its implications. Rather than pointing out this uncomfortable truth, Sophia simply noted that the initial presentation had focused on high-level strategic concepts rather than technical implementation details. The follow-up meeting with Henderson Industries was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, and Jennifer spent Wednesday morning rehearsing her presentation with the specialist team to ensure that she could field technical questions competently. Her preparation was thorough and systematic, demonstrating the type of attention to detail that should have characterized her original approach to the project. Sophia observed these sessions with mixed feelings, appreciating Jennifer's commitment to improvement while wondering why such care hadn't been invested from the beginning. Thursday morning arrived with an atmosphere of cautious optimism as Jennifer and her expanded team prepared for what everyone recognized as Morrison and Associates' last chance to win the Henderson contract. The presentation materials were comprehensive and sophisticated, the technical team was prepared to address detailed implementation questions, and Jennifer had invested significant effort in understanding the strategic framework that would guide their discussion. The Henderson executives arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, their demeanor professional but noticeably more reserved than it had been during their first visit. Patricia Henderson's greeting was cordial but brief, while Michael Chen and Jennifer Kim maintained the polite distance of people who were prepared to listen but no longer assumed that they would hear something impressive. Brad Morrison attempted to rebuild the personal rapport that had characterized the opening of their previous meeting, but his efforts were met with responses that suggested the Henderson team was now focused exclusively on business substance rather than relationship building. Jennifer's presentation began strongly, with clear acknowledgement of the concerns that had been raised during their previous meeting and systematic responses to each area of questioning. Her command of technical details was markedly improved, and she was able to discuss implementation strategies and financial modeling with confidence that had been completely absent from her earlier performance. The specialist team was introduced and given opportunities to address specific areas of expertise, creating a much more professional and competent impression than Morrison and Associates had managed to produce previously. As the meeting progressed, Sophia could hear that the Henderson executives were becoming more engaged and asking increasingly detailed questions that suggested genuine interest in moving forward with the project. Patricia Henderson's inquiries about implementation timelines and resource requirements indicated that she was beginning to envision how Morrison and Associates' proposal might actually be executed within her organization. Michael Chen's questions about integration with existing systems suggested that he was evaluating practical implementation challenges rather than simply assessing the credibility of the proposing team. The turning point came when Jennifer Kim asked about the risk assessment and mitigation strategies that would be employed to ensure project success. This was an area where Sophia's original analysis had been particularly sophisticated, incorporating lessons learned from similar projects and identifying potential failure points that might not be obvious to clients or consultants with less experience. Jennifer Walsh's response demonstrated genuine understanding of these strategic considerations, suggesting that her intensive preparation had actually enabled her to internalize complex concepts that she had previously understood only superficially. By the time the meeting concluded, the atmosphere had shifted significantly from the cautious skepticism that had characterized the opening discussions. The Henderson executives were clearly impressed by the depth and sophistication of Morrison & Associates' revised proposal, and their questions had evolved from challenging the team's competence to exploring how their collaboration might be structured. Patricia Henderson's closing remarks suggested that Morrison & Associates had successfully re-established their credibility as a potential partner, though she made clear that final decisions would depend on contract negotiations and reference checks with previous clients. After the Henderson team departed, the conference room erupted in celebration as Jennifer and her team recognized that they had successfully recovered from their earlier mistakes and positioned Morrison & Associates as a serious contender for the contract. Jennifer's relief was visible as she congratulated team members and began planning the proposal development that would be required to close the deal. The crisis had been averted through intensive effort and genuine professional growth, though Sophia couldn't help noting that none of this emergency response would have been necessary if Jennifer had simply studied the original materials with appropriate care. Over the next 2 weeks, contract negotiations proceeded smoothly as Henderson Industries and Morrison & Associates worked through the practical details of their potential collaboration. The technical specifications that had been developed during the crisis response proved invaluable during these discussions, providing the detailed implementation plans that Henderson required to make informed decisions about budget allocation and timeline expectations. Jennifer's team was able to address questions and concerns with confidence, having invested the time necessary to understand the complex strategic and operational issues that their proposal addressed. The contract was finalized on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the initial presentation disaster, with Henderson Industries committing to a $12 million engagement that would transform their supply chain operations over an 18-month period. The celebration in Morrison & Associates offices was enthusiastic and well-deserved, recognizing not only the financial significance of the contract but also the professional growth that had been required to earn Henderson's confidence and trust. Jennifer's success with the Henderson contract established her reputation as one of Morrison & Associates' most effective client relationship managers, leading to increased responsibilities and rapid promotion within the organization. Her experience with the near disaster had taught her valuable lessons about preparation and technical competence, and she began approaching subsequent projects with the systematic rigor that should have characterized her work from the beginning. The crisis had ultimately served as a catalyst for genuine professional development, though Sophia wondered whether such growth should have required the risk of losing a major client. As autumn progressed and the Henderson implementation began, Sophia found herself observing Morrison & Associates with different eyes, understanding more clearly both the potential and the limitations of the organization she owned but could not openly control. The crisis response had revealed impressive capabilities that existed within the company but were not consistently deployed, suggesting that management and leadership issues rather than fundamental competence problems were the primary obstacles to consistent excellence. The contradiction between Morrison & Associates' demonstrated abilities and their routine performance became a source of increasing frustration for Sophia, who could see how much value was being lost through inadequate project management and leadership development. The company employed talented professionals who were capable of sophisticated analysis and strategic thinking, but these capabilities were typically activated only in response to crisis situations rather than being systematically applied to all client engagements. Jennifer's transformation had been remarkable but also troubling in its implications, suggesting that Morrison & Associates' other supervisors and managers might also be operating well below their potential because they had never been forced to confront the inadequacy of their preparation and technical understanding. If every major project required a near failure before people invested appropriate effort in understanding the work they were supervising, the company would continue to waste opportunities and provide inconsistent value to clients. These observations led Sophia to question the strategy she had been pursuing over the past 8 months. Her original plan had been to understand the company's culture and operations from the inside before making the changes necessary to optimize performance and profitability. However, Her time as an intern had revealed problems that seemed to require more dramatic intervention than could be achieved through subtle manipulation of board decisions and policy recommendations. The most fundamental issue was that Morrison & Associates' promotion and reward systems were based primarily on relationship management and credit claiming rather than actual competence and contribution. People like Jennifer Walsh could build successful careers by appropriating the work of others, while the individuals who created that value remained invisible and undervalued. This created perverse incentives that actively discouraged the type of systematic excellence that would be required for Morrison & Associates to realize its full potential as an organization. Sophia's personal situation was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain as her frustration with these dynamics grew. She possessed the expertise and authority to address the problems she observed, but doing so would require revealing her true identity and abandoning the careful strategy she had been pursuing. The question was whether the insights she had gained through her internship experience justified the dramatic disruption that would be required to implement necessary changes. The decision point arrived unexpectedly on a Friday afternoon in late November, when Sophia overheard a conversation that crystallized all of her concerns about Morrison & Associates' culture and leadership. Jennifer Walsh was meeting with Brad Morrison to discuss staffing for the Henderson implementation, and their conversation revealed attitudes that went well beyond simple ignorance or inadequate preparation. "The intern has been useful for the Henderson project," Jennifer said, her voice carrying the casual tone of someone discussing office equipment. "She's good at detail work and technical research, though she sometimes acts like she understands strategy better than she actually does. I think we should keep her for the implementation phase, but we'll need to make sure she understands her role and doesn't get ideas about contributing to high-level decision-making." Brad Morrison's response was even more revealing of the attitudes that govern Morrison & Associates' approach to talent management. "These Stanford kids sometimes think their education makes them qualified for responsibilities they haven't earned. It's important to keep them focused on execution rather than strategy. We can't have interns thinking they're consultants." The irony of this conversation was almost overwhelming for Sophia, who possessed not only a Stanford education but also ownership of the company they were discussing and direct responsibility for the strategic thinking that had made the Henderson contract possible. More importantly, their comments revealed the systematic devaluation of competence and contribution that made it impossible for Morrison & Associates to develop or retain talent effectively. Listening to Jennifer and Brad discuss her appropriate role while completely ignoring her actual contributions felt like a crystallizing moment that made further patience impossible. The strategy of gradual change and behind-the-scenes influence had allowed her to understand Morrison & Associates' problems clearly, but it had also shown her that those problems could not be solved without dramatic intervention that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying the company's culture and leadership approach. That evening, Sophia sat in her small apartment reviewing the legal documents that established her ownership of Morrison & Associates and the authority that ownership conveyed. She had the power to make immediate changes that would address every problem she had observed, from promoting competent individuals to restructuring compensation systems to replacing leadership that had proven inadequate. The question was whether she was prepared to abandon her cover and accept the personal and professional consequences of such dramatic action. Her father had taught her that successful leadership sometimes required difficult decisions that challenged existing power structures, but he had also emphasized the importance of strategic patience and careful timing. The skills she had developed over the past 8 months would serve her well regardless of which path she chose, but the choice itself would determine not only her own future but also the future of Morrison & Associates and all the talented individuals whose contributions were currently undervalued. The weekend passed in careful consideration of her options and their potential consequences. By Monday morning, Sophia had reached a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. She would reveal her identity and take direct control of Morrison & Associates, accepting the disruption and conflict that such action would create in exchange for the opportunity to implement the changes that were necessary for the company's long-term success. Her plan was straightforward but dramatic, as she would wait for the next significant meeting involving Jennifer Walsh and Brad Morrison, then reveal her identity and authority in a context that would make their response visible to other employees and establish her credibility as the company's actual owner. This approach would create maximum impact while minimizing opportunities for damage control or private negotiations that might allow existing leadership to maintain their positions. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected when Morrison and Associates scheduled an all-hands meeting for Thursday morning to discuss the Henderson implementation and announce other recent client victories. The meeting would include most of the company's senior staff as well as representatives from each department, creating an ideal setting for the type of dramatic revelation that would be necessary to establish Sophia's authority and credibility. Thursday morning arrived with the particular energy that preceded major company meetings, as employees gathered in the main conference room to hear updates on company performance and strategic direction. Sophia took her usual position in the back of the room, dressed in her typical intern attire but carrying herself with a subtle confidence that would have been noticeable to anyone who was actually paying attention to her presence. Brad Morrison opened the meeting with his customary discussion of company performance and recent achievements, highlighting the Henderson contract as evidence of Morrison and Associates' growing reputation and client satisfaction. His presentation was polished and professional, though Sophia noted that he never mentioned the near disaster that had preceded the successful contract negotiation or the intensive crisis response that had been required to salvage the opportunity. Jennifer Walsh's presentation about the Henderson implementation was particularly galling to Sophia, as Jennifer described her strategic framework and her analytical insights with the confident authority of someone who had never doubted her ownership of ideas that had originated entirely from Sophia's research and analysis. Jennifer's account of the project development process completely eliminated Sophia's contributions, creating a narrative in which Jennifer herself had identified the opportunity, developed the strategic approach, and managed the client relationship that led to successful contract negotiation. As Jennifer concluded her presentation and opened the floor for questions, Sophia stood up from her position in the back of the room. Her movement was deliberate and confident, carrying an authority that seemed inconsistent with her position as an intern but entirely appropriate for someone who had been observing her own company from the shadows for nearly 9 months. "I have a question about the Henderson project," Sophia said, her voice clear and carrying across the conference room in a way that immediately captured everyone's attention. "Ms. Walsh, could you explain how you developed the supply chain optimization methodology that formed the core of your proposal? I'm particularly interested in the financial modeling that supported your ROI calculations." Jennifer's response revealed her continued ignorance of the technical details that had made the Henderson proposal successful. Her answer was vague and general, focusing on teamwork and collaboration rather than specific analytical approaches or strategic insights. As she spoke, Sophia could see confusion on the faces of several employees who had participated in the crisis response and understood the actual complexity of the work that Jennifer was claiming to have completed independently. "That's interesting," Sophia said, her tone remaining calm and professional while carrying an undertone that suggested she was building toward something significant. "I ask because I actually developed that optimization methodology myself, along with the financial models, competitive analysis, and implementation strategies that made your proposal successful. In fact, I'm the one who identified Henderson Industries as a potential client and researched their business challenges to determine how Morrison and Associates might provide value." The conference room fell silent as employees struggled to process what they were hearing. Jennifer's face flushed with a combination of anger and panic as she realized that her career-defining success was being challenged publicly by someone she had consistently dismissed as irrelevant. Brad Morrison's expression shifted from confusion to irritation as he prepared to defend Jennifer and restore what he viewed as appropriate hierarchy to the discussion. "Ms. Chen," Brad said, his voice carrying the particular authority of someone accustomed to ending uncomfortable conversations through executive intervention. "I think you may be confused about your role in supporting the Henderson project team. While your research assistance was certainly valuable, strategic development and client management require experience and responsibilities that go well beyond intern-level contributions." Sophia smiled, her expression that carried both warmth and unmistakable confidence as she prepared to deliver the revelation that would transform everything about Morrison and Associates' leadership structure. "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your concern about appropriate roles and responsibilities. Perhaps this would be a good time to clarify my actual position within this organization." She reached into her messenger bag and withdrew a folder containing legal documents that she had been carrying for months, waiting for the right moment to reveal their contents. The papers rustled softly in the silent conference room as she opened the folder and began distributing copies of documents that would fundamentally alter everyone's understanding of the power dynamics they had assumed were governing their workplace. My name is Sophia Chen, and I am the owner and chairman of the board of Morrison & Associates. I acquired this company 2 years ago through Transcendent Holdings, which is a subsidiary of Chen Pacific Enterprises. Every paycheck you receive, every client contract we negotiate, and every strategic decision made by this company's board of directors ultimately reports to me. The silence that followed was profound and complex, filled with the particular tension that accompanies moments when fundamental assumptions about reality are suddenly revealed to be completely incorrect. Jennifer Walsh's face had gone pale as she began to understand the implications of Sophia's revelation, while Brad Morrison stared at the legal documents as if they might somehow transform into something less threatening through the force of his disbelief. I have spent the past 8 months working in this company as an intern because I wanted to understand our culture, our capabilities, and our limitations from the perspective of someone who actually does the work that creates value for our clients. What I have learned has been both impressive and deeply concerning. Sophia's voice remained calm and professional as she continued, but her words carried an authority that no one in the room could ignore or dismiss. She was no longer speaking as an intern requesting consideration, but as an owner addressing her employees about the future direction of the organization she controlled. Morrison & Associates employs talented, dedicated professionals who are capable of sophisticated analysis and strategic thinking. The quality of work that this team produced during the Henderson crisis response demonstrated capabilities that should characterize all of our client engagements. However, our management and leadership systems consistently prevent these capabilities from being deployed effectively. Her critique was systematic and pointed, addressing specific problems she had observed while maintaining the professional tone appropriate for a CEO discussing organizational challenges with her staff. The employees in the room listened with fascination and growing comprehension as Sophia articulated concerns that many of them had experienced but never felt empowered to address. Ms. Walsh, your presentation today claimed credit for work that you neither completed nor understood. This pattern has been consistent throughout my time observing your approach to project management. You have built your career by appropriating the contributions of others while adding little value of your own beyond superficial presentation skills and relationship management. Jennifer Walsh attempted to respond, but her words came out as stammering protests rather than coherent defense of her actions. The legal documents that Sophia had distributed made it impossible to challenge her authority, while her detailed knowledge of the Henderson project made it impossible to deny her accusations about credit theft and inadequate preparation. Mr. Morrison, your leadership of this organization has been characterized by the same patterns that govern Ms. Walsh's approach to project management. You have focused on managing relationships and maintaining hierarchy while remaining ignorant of the actual work that creates value for our clients. Your comments about keeping interns are focused on execution rather than strategy reveal assumptions about talent development that actively prevent this organization from realizing its potential. Brad Morrison's attempts at response were similarly ineffective, as he struggled to adapt to a situation that challenged every assumption he had made about his position within Morrison & Associates. The revelation that the intern he had consistently ignored actually owned the company was difficult enough to process, but the systematic critique of his leadership approach was even more destabilizing. Effective immediately, I will be assuming direct operational control of Morrison & Associates. Ms. Walsh, your employment is terminated. Mr. Morrison, you will be transitioning to a consulting role with significantly reduced responsibilities. I will be meeting individually with every employee over the next 2 weeks to discuss their contributions, their career objectives, and their role in the organization going forward. The transformation was swift and comprehensive, as Sophia moved from invisible intern to active CEO in the space of a single meeting. Her authority was unquestionable and her understanding of the organization's problems was detailed and specific, making it impossible for anyone to dismiss her critique or resist the changes she was implementing. Before we conclude this meeting, I want to address the broader implications of what has happened here. Morrison & Associates has the potential to be a truly exceptional consulting organization, but realizing that potential will require fundamental changes in how we approach talent development, project management, and client service. The people in this room possess impressive capabilities that have been consistently undervalued by leadership systems that prioritize hierarchy over competence. Her vision for the company's future was ambitious but grounded in realistic understanding of both capabilities and limitations. The changes she proposed would create opportunities for genuine professional growth while establishing accountability systems that rewarded actual contribution rather than political skill or credit appropriation. I believe that most of you have been frustrated by the same problems I observed during my time as an intern. You have watched incompetent managers claim credit for your work while contributing little value of their own. You have seen important projects mismanaged by people who never bothered to understand their underlying complexity. You have experienced the frustration of working for an organization that employs talented people but consistently fails to deploy their talents effectively. The room remained silent, but Sophia could see recognition and hope on many faces as employees began to envision what Morrison and Associates might become under leadership that actually understood and valued competence. The revelation that their mysterious intern had actually been their owner was shocking, but the promise of systematic change that would address long-standing frustrations was even more significant. Over the next 6 months, we will be implementing comprehensive changes designed to align our management practices with our actual capabilities and potential. Promotion and compensation will be based on demonstrated competence and contribution rather than political relationships. Project management will be assigned to people who possess relevant expertise rather than people who simply hold appropriate titles. Client service will be organized around delivering exceptional value rather than managing impressions and maintaining comfortable relationships. The meeting concluded with Sophia providing practical information about the transition process and her expectations for how the organization would function during the period of change. Her transformation from powerless intern to authoritative CEO was complete, but the work of actually implementing the changes she had promised would require months of careful effort and systematic attention to detail. In the days that followed, news of Morrison and Associates' dramatic leadership change spread quickly through the business community, creating curiosity about both Sophia's background and her plans for the organization. The story of the intern who revealed herself to be the company's owner captured public imagination while raising questions about corporate culture and leadership development that extended well beyond Morrison and Associates itself. Sophia's individual meetings with employees revealed the depth of frustration that had existed throughout the organization, but also the enthusiasm that her promise of systematic change had generated. Talented professionals who had been considering leaving Morrison and Associates began developing plans for expanding their contributions and taking on additional responsibilities. The prospect of working for an organization that actually valued competence over hierarchy created energy and commitment that had been absent for years. The Henderson implementation proceeded smoothly under Sophia's direct oversight, with the detailed technical documentation and strategic planning that had been developed during the crisis response providing a solid foundation for successful project execution. Henderson Industries expressed appreciation for the improved project management and communication that characterized Morrison and Associates' new approach, leading to discussions about additional collaboration opportunities that might not have been possible under the previous leadership structure. 6 months after her dramatic revelation, Morrison and Associates had been transformed from a mediocre consulting firm into an organization that consistently delivered exceptional value to its clients while providing meaningful career development opportunities for its employees. The changes Sophia had implemented were systematic and comprehensive, addressing every aspect of operations from project management to compensation systems to client relationship development. The company's financial performance had improved significantly as client satisfaction increased and talented employees remained engaged rather than seeking opportunities elsewhere. Morrison and Associates' reputation in the consulting industry had been enhanced by their demonstrated ability to deliver sophisticated analysis and strategic thinking on consistently reliable basis, leading to new client relationships and expanded engagements with existing clients. Sophia's personal journey from invisible intern to recognized CEO had taught her valuable lessons about leadership, organizational culture, and the complex relationships between authority and competence. Her father's teachings about strategic patience and careful observation had served her well, but she had also learned the importance of direct action when systematic problems required comprehensive solutions. The story of Morrison and Associates' transformation became a case study in business schools and leadership development programs, illustrating both the potential for organizational change and the challenges that must be overcome when existing power structures prevent talented people from contributing effectively. Sophia's willingness to spend months observing from the lowest level of the organizational hierarchy had provided insights that would not have been available through traditional consulting or executive assessment approaches. Years later, as Morrison and Associates continued to grow and develop under Sophia's leadership, the lessons learned during her time as an intern continued to influence her approach to talent development and organizational culture. She never forgot the experience of being undervalued and ignored despite possessing capabilities that could have contributed significantly to the organization's success, and she remained committed to ensuring that Morrison and Associates would never again waste the potential of its talented employees through inadequate leadership or management systems. The company that had once been characterized by hierarchy and credit appropriation had become a place where competence was recognized and rewarded, where challenging projects received appropriate attention and resources, and where employees could build meaningful careers based on their actual contributions rather than their ability to navigate political relationships. The transformation that began with Sophia's dramatic revelation in that conference room had created lasting change that benefited not only Morrison and Associates but also every client they served and every talented professional who chose to build their career within an organization that finally understood how to value what they had to offer.